The number hits your account on the 1st of the month. Not a bonus, not a gift. Just a quiet deposit that arrives whether you're awake to see it or not. Rent is due on the 3rd, and for the first time in your life, you don't have to think about how those two dates connect. The money that covers your rent this month didn't come from your job. It came from an account you funded years ago, one you barely think about anymore. Quietly generating income while you sleep, while you work, while you live a life that has nothing to do with checking a portfolio. This is what it actually feels like when your investments start paying your bills. Not a headline, not a milestone with fireworks. Just rent paid without a paycheck touching it. Most people spend their entire working lives trading hours for dollars, and dollars for rent in an endless loop that resets every 30 days. It's such a normal cycle that almost nobody stops to question it. Work, get paid, pay rent, repeat. 40 years, give or take, until retirement finally breaks the loop, if it ever does. But there's a smaller, quieter group of people who broke that loop early. Not by winning the lottery, not by inheriting money. By building something almost nobody talks about outside of finance forums and quiet conversations between people who already understand it. A stream of investment income large enough to cover a fixed, recurring expense, completely independent of whether they show up to work that month or not. Today, we're going to walk through exactly what that looks like, how it's built, what it actually feels like the first time it happens, and the specific, unglamorous math that gets an ordinary person from "my paycheck covers my rent" to "my investments cover my rent and my paycheck is now optional." Because once you understand this shift, you'll never look at a rent payment the same way again. Let's start with the moment it becomes real. It's the 3rd of the month. You open your banking app out of habit, mostly to make sure the rent payment cleared. It did. Automatically, the way it always does now. But this time something is different. You scroll up one screen to the account that isn't your checking account, the one holding your dividend stocks, your REIT shares, your small slice of rental income from a property you don't manage yourself. And there it is. A deposit, dated 2 days ago, sitting quietly in that account. The number is almost exactly what your rent costs. Not a coincidence, a milestone. The kind that doesn't come with a party, because almost nobody else would understand why it matters. For years, this deposit was smaller than the rent. $100 here, $300 there. Enough to notice, not enough to matter. You'd glance at it, mentally file it under nice but not real money, and go back to your actual paycheck to cover the actual bills. But investment income doesn't stay small if you keep feeding it and leave it alone. It compounds, quietly, the way almost everything in this world of wealth-building compounds. Invisible for a long stretch. And then, one ordinary month, suddenly large enough to matter. This month it's large enough to matter. You don't quit your job. You don't tell anyone at the office. You go to work the next day exactly like you did the day before. But something has shifted permanently in how you relate to money, and it happened without anyone else in your life noticing anything different at all. Let's rewind, because the how of this story matters more than the moment itself. This didn't start with a windfall. It started with a decision, made years earlier, that felt almost too boring to be worth mentioning. Instead of spending every extra dollar, a fixed percentage of every paycheck would go into income-generating investments. Assets specifically chosen not just to grow in value, but to pay out cash regularly, month after month, quarter after quarter, regardless of what the news cycle was saying about the economy. There's a specific term for this approach in finance: building passive income streams. It sounds abstract until you break down what it actually means in practice. It means owning small pieces of companies that share their profits directly with shareholders through dividends. It means owning shares in real estate investment trusts, companies that own apartment buildings, shopping centers, warehouses, and pass along a portion of the rental income they collect to anyone who owns a piece of them. It means, for some people, owning an actual rental property and collecting rent from a tenant instead of paying rent to a landlord. The mechanism differs. The principle is identical: money working continuously, generating income without requiring active labor in exchange. Here's where the math becomes genuinely interesting. The average one-bedroom apartment in a mid-sized American city currently rents for somewhere between $1,200 and $1,600 a month. To cover that entirely through dividend income alone, using a conservative average dividend yield of roughly 4%, someone would need approximately $360,000 to $480,000 invested in dividend-paying assets. That number sounds enormous in isolation. It sounds almost impossible. But broken down across a decade or two of consistent investing, it stops looking impossible and starts looking like arithmetic. Someone investing $800 a month into a diversified portfolio of dividend-focused index funds, assuming a historically reasonable 8% average annual total return, crosses $400,000 in roughly 18 years. Not from a single lucky pick, not from perfectly timing the market. From consistency, automated, left alone to compound. 18 years sounds like a long time until you realize the alternative. 18 years of paying rent entirely out of a paycheck, with nothing left over at the end of it, except the habit of doing it all over again next month. There's a specific psychological shift that happens once passive income starts covering a real, recurring bill, and it's worth understanding in detail, because it changes behavior in ways that go far beyond the money itself. Before this shift, every dollar spent feels like it's being pulled directly from active effort. Rent isn't just $1,400. It's roughly a full week of work, converted directly into a housing payment, disappearing the moment it arrives. There's an exhausting, invisible tax on every expense, the mental math of, how many hours did this cost me? After the shift, that math changes entirely. The rent is no longer coming from hours worked. It's coming from money that's already been earned, already invested, already doing its job in the background. The labor was done years ago, and now the asset itself is doing the work. This is the exact distinction wealthy investors have described for over a century, phrased slightly differently every time, but always pointing at the same idea. There's a fundamental difference between working for money and having money work for you. Most people spend their entire lives on one side of that line without ever realizing there's another side to cross to. The first time an investment payment covers a real bill, something clicks that no amount of reading about compound interest can fully replicate. It stops being theoretical. It becomes proof, tangible, dated, sitting right there in a bank statement, that the system actually works, not just in a textbook, but in an actual checking account covering an actual rent payment this month without a single hour of labor attached to it. It's worth being honest about the timeline here, because this isn't a story about getting rich overnight, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest. In the first few years, the passive income barely registers. A dividend deposit of $40, then $65, then $110. It's tempting, during this stretch, to feel like the whole strategy isn't working. Like the numbers are too small to ever matter. Like maybe this whole approach is a waste of time compared to just working more hours or picking up a side hustle instead. This is exactly the stage where most people quit. Not because the strategy fails, because the strategy is slow in a way that feels indistinguishable from failing, right up until it isn't. The people who make it to the other side of this story share one specific trait. They treated the early, tiny deposits as proof of concept rather than proof of failure. A $40 dividend deposit isn't impressive, but it's real evidence that the mechanism works, that money invested today genuinely does generate more money later without additional effort. Scaling that mechanism up is a matter of time and consistency, not a different strategy entirely. By year 7 or 8, the deposits start covering something real, not rent yet, but maybe a utility bill, or a phone bill, or a car payment. This is often the point where the psychological shift really takes hold, because now there's a specific, tangible line item in life that simply doesn't require a paycheck anymore. By year 12 to 15, for someone investing consistently and living within their means, the deposits start approaching real housing cost territory. And somewhere in there, on an entirely ordinary day, the number finally crosses the rent payment. There's a specific reason this milestone, rent covered by investments, matters more than the exact dollar amount involved, and it has to do with what rent represents. Rent is not a luxury expense. It's not a nice-to-have. It's one of the most non-negotiable recurring costs in most people's lives, month after month, for decades. Regardless of what else is happening in the economy or in their career, it is, in many ways, the most stable and predictable expense most people carry, which means covering it with investment income isn't just a financial milestone. It's a foundational one. Once the single largest, most consistent monthly obligation is no longer dependent on showing up to a job, every other financial decision downstream of that becomes fundamentally less fragile. A layoff stops being catastrophic. A difficult boss stops holding as much leverage. A slow month at work stops triggering the kind of quiet panic that comes from wondering how the bills are going to get covered this time. The floor of financial safety rises permanently, and it rises without requiring a raise, a promotion, or a lucky break. Just years of consistent, boring investing finally reaching critical mass. This is the actual definition of financial freedom that almost nobody uses, because it's less exciting than the version sold online. The yachts, the passive income screenshots, the "I quit my job" narratives. The real version is quieter and, frankly, more useful. Financial freedom is the point where your fixed, non-negotiable expenses are covered by income that doesn't require your labor. Everything past that point is upside. Everything before it is still, to some degree, dependent on showing up to work. It's worth addressing directly why this doesn't happen for most people, even though the math is publicly available and none of it is secret. The first reason is simple impatience. 18 years is a genuinely long time, and most financial content is built around the promise of speed. The 10-day trading strategy, the one stock that's about to explode, the side hustle that replaces a salary in 6 months. Slow compounding passive income doesn't sell nearly as well because it doesn't offer anything exciting to talk about for the first decade. The second reason is a fundamental misunderstanding of what passive income actually requires up front. It isn't passive to build. It's extremely active to build. Years of consistent contributions. Research, patience through market downturns, and resisting the urge to spend the growing balance on something more immediately satisfying. It becomes passive only after the foundation is fully in place. Most people give up during the active building phase because they expected it to feel passive from day one. The third reason is less discussed, but arguably the most important. Most people never actually calculate their real target number. They know vaguely that investing is good, but they never sit down and work out exactly how much invested capital at a reasonable dividend yield would be required to cover their actual rent. Without that specific number, there's no finish line to work toward, just a vague, directionless habit that's easy to abandon the first time life gets complicated. The people who actually reach this milestone tend to do one thing differently early on. They calculate the real number, not a round motivational figure pulled from social media, but their actual rent, divided by a realistic dividend yield, producing an actual target. A number specific enough to plan around, track progress against, and eventually hit. So what does life actually look like on the other side of this milestone, once it's reached and sustained? Mostly, it looks the same. That's the part almost nobody expects. There's no dramatic lifestyle change. Rent still gets paid on the same day, from the same bank account, through the same automatic transfer that's been running for years. The only difference is the source, quietly rerouted from paycheck to portfolio. But underneath that unchanged surface, something has fundamentally shifted. Work becomes optional in a way it never was before, not because the job is quit, but because it no longer has to be the thing standing between this month and financial disaster. Decisions get made with more room to breathe. A frustrating year at work doesn't carry the same existential weight it used to, because the roof over your head was never actually dependent on that job continuing to go well. And there's a specific kind of quiet confidence that comes from checking a bank account on the 3rd of the month and seeing a bill paid by money that was earning while you slept, while you worked, while you lived a completely ordinary day that had nothing to do with finance at all. That's the actual prize hiding inside this story, not the number, not even the rent payment itself. The quiet, permanent shift from a life entirely dependent on active effort to a life partially, and eventually, for some people, entirely, supported by assets working continuously in the background. It starts with a decision that feels almost too small to matter, redirecting a percentage of income automatically into something built to generate cash flow over time. It gets tested during the slow years, when the deposits feel too small to take seriously, and it resolves, eventually, on some completely ordinary day with a deposit that quietly, permanently, covers the rent. If this video gave you a clearer picture of how passive income actually gets built, not the version sold online, but the real, unglamorous math behind it, hit subscribe. The Wealth Code breaks down exactly how real financial freedom gets built every single week, without the hype and without the shortcuts. Drop a like if this one hit home, and let us know in the comments. What's the first bill you'd want your investments to cover? And if you want to see what happens after this milestone, when passive income starts covering everything, not just rent, go watch our video on the 7 quiet rules the upper 1% actually live by. Because this is exactly where those rules lead. We'll see you in the next one.